Much to talk about. One of my major concerns when it comes to Trump's foreign policy is that we really don't know a whole lot about his thinking. He did mention some things during the campaign. Sometimes he kind of contradicted himself, but it was, for the most part, a focus on domestic issues here. Now we have him coming to the White House in a very dangerous world. What, on your mind, should he be thinking about most right now?
Well, what I'm concerned about, and where I'll get some better information, will be when we find out who he appoints to the cabinet and who he's talking to. And already we have some hints. Unfortunately, there's been several neoconservatives that are getting closer to Trump, and if he gets their advice from him, then I don't think that's a good sign. During the campaign, he did talk a little bit about backing off and being less confrontational with Russia, and I like that. But he criticized some of the wars on the Middle East. At the same time, he believed we should accelerate, the war against ISIS and terrorism, all without showing me that he has an understanding of exactly what causes terrorism. So I will look for who he appoints and where he's getting his advice. But right now, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. But from experience, from previous elections, most of the time we don't get what we hear. Yeah. They don't follow through on their promises. In Trump's case, who knows what he promised? He's been pretty vague on foreign policy.
It's true. That's true. I mean, he had the article in the National Interest, if I'm not mistaken, and it was very realist in outlook, but it had some what I thought to be some kind of contradictory trends there. One thing I worry about is recent history, because we had Barack Obama, a liberal Democrat, elected, and he ended up being surrounded by some of the most egregious neocons and very adventurous foreign policy. Now, he's made that very clear in a number of ways that that's not what he wants to do. He doesn't want to pursue stupid wars. Is it going to be that difficult to reach out into the foreign policy establishment where he's going to be able to get some new thinking? Because a lot of Republicans turned their back on him in the foreign policy sphere during the campaign.
You talk about contradictions. With Obama, he ended up with the Nobel Prize for Peace. Yeah. So that is enough to confuse us. But, when we look at the president, we look at what he said, we look at what he might do, we look at his advisors. But quite frankly, there's an outside source, which we refer to as a deep state or a shadow government. There's a lot of influence by people that are actually more powerful than our government itself, our president, and all. No. I mean, you take, for instance, how our government gets involved in elections around the world. Yep. Whether it's in the Middle East or Ukraine. We've been very much involved, and we've done this for more than 50 years. And so that isn't known to the public. Matter of fact, all we do is see the downside decades later where there may be some blowback. So we can't know exactly that. So yes, Trump is his own guy more so than most of have ever been in before. Yeah. We hope he can maintain an independence and then go in the right direction. But I fear the fact that there's so much that can be done secretly, out of control of our apparent government and out of the view of so many citizens. The greatest thing that's happened in this campaign is the evidence and the information we got from WikiLeaks. Yep. I think this is why Trump won. I think this is why the media looks silly. And I think that's very encouraging. Hopefully that will have a favorable influence on Trump.
One of the most interesting elements of the recent election campaign was the role that Russia played in it. He's made it very clear that he wants to have better relations with Russia. He took a lot of flack for it, a lot of flack. I think that backfired on the Clinton people, very much so. But he's still wanting to reach out. There are people that are saying, whispers going on, the chatter in the background is that Trump should have some kind of informal meeting with Putin before the inauguration. How do you feel about that?
I'm indifferent to it. I like to emphasize that we're in charge. I think if somebody calls up, they can talk if they want to get together. I don't think that's the key to it, but I can't see how it could hurt if it's sincere. If it's always important, just to angle for a position. The first thing that Trump has done, he's contacted the Prime Minister of Israel, and they're planning on getting together, and they set up. If that can be done, why can't we do that for others as well?
Well, one of the worries is that we have a client leading leader in a client state, Ukraine, Poroshenko. And there are people that are worried that he might start another offensive against the people of the East while Obama's still in office, kind of forcing the American hand right here. Also, you have like maybe Saudi Arabia vis-a-vis Syria, Turkey. There's a lot of elements out there that want to push things along because they simply don't know what to expect from Donald Trump.
Yes, and that's right. They may do this. It might not be the president's doing. And sometimes, you know, the false flags and the unintended consequences are beyond the control of even a sincere president that would like that not to happen. So it is true. Those things could happen. But I, quite frankly, think it would be the personal belief of Obama that he probably doesn't want to go out with a roaring war going on and making the world a lot less safe. But I wouldn't argue against it, that impossibility. I think that is very possible. But also the reason why even when Trump is president, there'll be some things out of his control too, and he doesn't like to get pushed around. So if it looks like that we're getting pushed around in the world, his reflexes will be rather quick, and they're not going to be wishy-washy, and so that should concern people as well.
You know, one of the things that it was mentioned, he got a lot of flack for it, is the structure of NATO and who should pay for what and security and whatnot. I mean, this is an argument that's been made since the end of the Cold War. I'm at a complete loss why he was attacked so much for it. Academics have been talking about it for 25 years or so here, we see European leaders right now in NATO kind of pushing the Russian threat, quote unquote, even harder now because they know what Trump's thinking is here. Again, people trying to push his hand even before he's in the White House.
Yeah, that's right. And I have a solution for all that. Just get the United States out of NATO.
Agreed.
We should have never joined. The long-term principles of the United States was stay out of entangling lines, stay out of Europe. And yet, as we became very wealthy and very powerful and economic power of the world, especially after the downfall of the Soviet system, and we have all the weaponry, it seems like we are obsessed with our power. But we're going to be bankrupt too, just as the Soviet system got bankrupt and they had to change their ways. I think that's going to happen to us as well. So I'm optimistic in the long run, but it's going to be messy on the short run. But, you know, there were people that we refer to as the old right, and they were libertarian-type Republicans. Robert Taft, for instance, he says, don't get into NATO. That's going to give us a lot of trouble. And right now, it's giving us a lot of trouble. And Trump's pointing out, well, we need some money, and we're going to send out bills. And that's a little bit over the top. I think we should just get out of it. And Trump has said that. But the odds of him really pushing and winning that argument are very slim compared to him backtracking a little bit and saying, they're not going to push me around. I'm going to go and take care of this problem, and I'll send everybody a bill. So, you know, that's why there's a lot of uncertainty in foreign policy, and I just hope for the best that we will be less interventionist because obviously, you know, libertarians were pleased with his outreach to Russia when everybody else was, you know, looking for a war, especially when the overthrow of the elected leader in Ukraine was occurring. We saw no purpose in that. Why go looking for a fight? Why do we have to have more NATO troops up against the shores and the borders of Russia right now? And that was done under a president who says that, who won the Nobel Peace Prize. So there's so much contradictions. And hopefully we'll get more truth out, and that's why I keep hoping for a lot more WikiLeaks around, a lot more organizations that reveal to us, whether it's Ed Snowden or WikiLeaks or whatever. We need to know what government's thinking, and I apply that to all governments. I mean, we should be protecting, my advice is protect the privacy of individual law-abiding citizens and make sure government is open and no secrets. But I'm challenging all of history because that's generally not the way it's been.
Dr. Paul, you know, Russia played, again, a major role in this election in a very strange way because we still have no evidence of the hacking, and we heard this to the very last second in the campaign. John Podesta, I think that's how he's going to go down in history, unfortunately for him. But, you know, the relationship between Russia and the United States is very bad. It's the worst it's been since the end of the Cold War here. And the Russians are pretty adamant that they have been on the short end of the stick. Now, a lot of people can make a different argument, and I'm perfectly willing to listen to that argument, but I'm giving the argument from their side at this point in time. What needs to happen right now? Does Trump need to go reach out to to Vladimir Putin and the Russian people and say, look, enough is enough. We need to sit down and talk about our differences. Doesn't mean we're going to solve everything, but we need to have a reasonable, open dialogue, which that's something that we don't have right now. Go ahead, Dr. Paul.
Yeah, well, I think that's good advice, but I would apply that to everybody. I want to talk to everybody, be friends with everybody, trade with everybody. Trading is better. Now, my greatest disappointment was with this renewing of this so-called Cool War, that the trade was going to break down. I thought for sure the amount of trade that was going on with East and West and Russia and Europe would forego all of this stuff. But even though the trade still goes on and is helpful, I think that's what we need. So yes, people should reach out. And you say there's a lot the Russian people and American people could share, and I think that is true. My little booklet that I wrote on Swords in the Plowshares, my point is that people never want the war. And the peace candidate, in a way, Trump was more peaceful because he wanted to at least talk to Russia. And I think people, the average person, likes that idea. They know it's very costly and they pay all the bills. But what they have to contend with is part of the deep state that controls the media that builds up the war fever. So they just think of how reluctant the American people were about going into the Middle East. But then there was the war drums beating, and they get converted, and they get scared, and that is what's going on right now. You know, Putin becomes the monster. You know, he has nuclear weapons and all this sort of thing. So I think it's part of the media, a major part of the media that participates in the war propaganda. Yeah. But I believe if the people got to talk with each other, they're not going to get together. Do you think the American people, if you have 10,000 American people and 10,000 Russians get together and say, hey, you know, we ought to have a war here. I mean, this peace is for the birds. And, you know, if we have a war, we can build airplanes. It doesn't happen that way. It happens by governments. And then if the government's not acting right, it's the secret government. It's the shadow government. It's the CIA and the false flags and the accidents that happen. And then the people get angry because if you don't get angry at your enemies, then you're unpatriotic. And we all have to be patriotic. But we can be patriotic and friends too, but unfortunately, and this is why I'm optimistic, is I think the media's been exposed and the government's been exposed. Don't believe the government. I love the fact that 68% of the American people don't trust the government. Probably one of the reasons why Trump won, because governments lie, and I don't know if any government never avoids lying. The noble lie has been around for a long time. That's why I want government to be very, very small. And then maybe we would have a more peaceful world.
Well, we know the media likes to lie a lot, too. That's the double whammy at this point in time right now. One of the important things that we got from Trump during the campaign is that he believes, and wow, isn't it commonsensical to say that the United States and Russia should work together to defeat ISIS? I mean, what a wonderful idea. But no, we have an Obama Pentagon that doesn't want to do that. I worry the same thing is going to happen again. I really worry that we're going to, you know, Trump will be put there. The deep state will have their little set for him to do. For Obama, it was Obamacare, okay? Maybe it will be Trump bridges and hotels for the world. I don't know. I just really worry here that the deep state is going to undermine him. And his cadre policy will undermine him. I mean, Barack Obama, they were running circles around him. What do you bet, Dr. Paul, that one February morning they told the president, Mr. President, there's been a coup in Kiev. And he said, really? Wow, how'd that happen? Because I don't believe he was involved in it. I think his underlings were involved in it. And then Trump comes up with this idea to fight ISIS together. That is a remarkably smart idea, but complicated for the deep state, for the CIA, for the Pentagon, for the media. We could go on and on. Everybody that hated Trump. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'll challenge that a little bit. because I think you're right to point out that we're at end, say, in Syria. Russia's trying to preserve and defend an ally and a government. We're doing the very opposite in Iraq and different places. So, yes, and there's pretty good evidence that we have not been all that aggressive against ISIS in Syria, and the Russians have been more aggressive, and you're suggesting that they ought to coordinate and work together. My idea of coordination and working together is probably understanding the situation. I don't think that we should accelerate the war against ISIS, because I think the war is artificial. I think it's been created by bad policy. I want to avoid the incentive for ISIS to exist. So I believe it's our foreign policy that incentivizes, the radicals to speak out and attack different people. So I think we should have an understanding together. But I do not believe. I don't want Trump and the Russian government to become military allies and start bombing the living daylights out of ISIS, because you could say, where are they? Well, the other day I read an article from Eric Margolis. He said, ISIS is actually a paper tiger, and if you remove their incentive, they'd even be less than a paper tiger. And if there is a problem, let the people who are suffering deal with it. Let the civil strife within a country deal with it. And obviously Russia has a more legal justification to be in Syria, but we don't have the legal justification. So
Absolutely.
I think if both of us got together and fought ISIS by saying, let us hands off, let things go. And if there's a civil strife going on in a Muslim country, and let them work it out. That is the best way. I know if we had strife here, we're not going to want foreign governments to come in here and try to settle things. Whether the strife and the problems were in Canada or Mexico, would rather resent a foreign nation coming in here and say, well, we have to do something to get after the United States government because they've been unfair to us. No, I think this whole idea of responsibility for oneself and being independent is a good way to go, because once again, I think that's what the people really want. I don't think the people would get together and say, hey, let's have a war. That sounds like lots of fun. It's only those people who have oil to deal with and finances, building weapons.
Right.
There's always some sinister motivation for these wars.
Probably the most important WikiLeaks that we got was the fact that Hillary Clinton and her cronies were in full knowledge that Qatar and Saudi Arabia were funding ISIS, and it got almost zero play in Western media. This is the most significant leak to come out. It shows the collusion here. And now I think, and I hope Donald Trump will one more time go back to the emails and make it really clear that the United States will no longer be involved in that kind of behavior, because it was aiding and abetting terrorists. And we have very nasty allies in the Middle East. That needs to be rectified as well, if you want to have a more honest foreign policy that serves the interests of the United States, not other countries. Go ahead, Ron Paul.
Well, what they'll argue is the mixed thing. I think United States sold more weapons under Obama, the peace candidate, than any other president.
And the biggest deal was to Saudi Arabia.
Your argument, we should.
Yes.
Yeah, and of course it's around there. But the military-industrial complex endorses Keynesianism. There's domestic Keynesianism, but there's military Keynesianism. And that's why the weapons are being built. And they build them and throw them away. There's waste. They stop building them. They build aircraft carriers that don't work, and it goes on and on. And if other countries, want to keep building, let them build them. It just takes money away from the mouths of individuals. But I just think that it would be a lot better off for us to stay out of that. But it's not just Saudi Arabia and Yemen. I mean, we've been involved throughout all the countries. I think what's going on in Syria, I mean, we're not exactly doing everything we could do to keep ISIS from having weapons and using them to try to fight the Russian ally, the Assad government. That's going on. That is why it is so wonderful for a person like myself to argue on moral principle and constitutional principles that we ought to mind our own business. It's the best thing for peace and prosperity, and that's what the people really want when it's offered to them. And you don't have to say, well, what are you going to do about A, B, C? There's problems there. Well, you know, there wasn't much we could do when the Soviets were killing hundreds of millions of people or millions of people. We became their allies, you know, when it became necessary to fight Hitler. So, you know, this whole idea that we can solve all these problems and that our exceptionalism, I think it backfires on us when you go around the world and say, and even if we have good values, my argument has always been that we should exemplify them. We should set a standard. So if we do well and we do better with our free society, maybe other countries would emulate us. Now that's spreading a message, but you can't spread a noble, good, thorough moral message by using force and intimidation and bombs and wars. That doesn't work, and that's what we have resorted to too often.
So if I could summarize everything you just said, answering my question, would that be the Trump doctrine that you would like to see American foreign policy emulate?
Yeah, in a way, sure. If he could become a non-interventionist, you know, that would be great. But the pressures would be too great. I mean, his personality would resist on that. The times that we live in would resist it. The deep state would create a crisis, and I think you even suggested, well, what if something happens even before he's elected? Some crisis is created, and maybe not directly by Obama. You know, then it overrides all those good instincts of the people, because then it's nationalism and then it's a patriotism, protecting the troops, and don't vote. I mean, even Trump, who is less militant than the rest of the presidents so far, he said we have to rebuild the military. Okay, I always thought we had a pretty good military.
One last question here, or maybe statement here. I think the best foreign policy decision President-elect Trump could make is to appoint you Secretary of State. How do you react?
Well, it would be tough under these conditions, and I won't have to be worrying about turning it down because it's not going to come. I will just have to express my way in my quiet sort of way, and maybe somebody will listen. You know, when I went to Congress, I didn't expect to turn things around. I just wanted to make
Dr.
a statement.
I'm sorry, we've run out of time.
The statement spread.
We've run out of time. Thank you very much.